Alright, welcome back to part 9. So we have the game working, but I'm going to try and show you how to change the network manager so that we've got an offline scene and an online scene, and then we'll look at customizing the menu as well. So we're going to customize so we have our own menu rather than using the default network manager HUD, which is kind of rubbish. So we'll get started with that. So I'm just going to create an empty scene with just a standard scene, and we're going to call this menu scene. And we're going to rename this sample scene. We're going to call this game scene because this has got all the game scene stuff in it so far. So the game scene that we have has this network manager, and if you remember, we're in 2D. So if you remember from this previously, the network manager is a don't destroy unload. So what we need to do is we need to take this network manager and put it into the game scene, and we'll go from the game scene into the menu scene and it will carry it over. So what I'll do, the easiest thing to do would be I'm just going to create a folder in here, and we're going to call this prefabs because I'm going to make this network manager into a prefab. So if I take network manager and drag it into the prefabs folder, you'll see that this is now the prefab containing everything that we had previously for our network manager. That allows me to be able to delete it from this scene and open up my new scene. So it was called menu scene. We will save that one, and this one's got basically nothing in it, and I'm just going to take that prefab from the prefabs menu and drag it into network manager into there. So I'm just going to reset the transform so it's in the middle of the world. So the next step for that is this network manager needs to know the offline and online scene. So it's really easy, you just drag the scenes into the correct place. So this is the prefab, so we should in theory go to the actual prefab view with that little arrow so that the actual prefab gets changed across any instances of it. So we had menu scene for the offline scene and game scene for the online scene. You'll notice the menu, the error that you get down the bottom, it says that they haven't been added to the build settings of my project, so we need to add them there. So you do that from the file menu, build settings, and we'll just drag them into the scenes to build right here, if that's not already done. So now the network manager, you should be able to add menu scene as offline and game scene as online, and nothing much else changes when you do that. We're still going to use this default HUD, but we'll go out of the prefab view. We're now in the menu scene, as you can see from here, and when we press play you'll get the same menu as you were before. Now obviously I'm not going to concentrate on making this all pretty. You could change the background, put images in, do whatever you want, but we see that when we click this host, it jumps us to the game scene, and if we look on the left hand side, you'll see this don't destroy unload. The network manager, the very same network manager, has been carried across, so it's the very same one. So we're going to create a menu that has to work in both the game scene and the menu scene. So the easiest thing for us to do right now is just to replace the buttons. So we're going to create a script that will be able to eventually disable this, but we're going to replace them one at a time. So I will go into I'll do the simple first person controller scripts, and I'll put it in here. It's not the best place to put it, I should probably be a bit more organized, but because it's such a small project we'll go with it. So I'm going to create a C# script, and I'm going to call it menu script. I'll do fine, menu script. So the menu script is going to replace in the network manager, it's going to replace the old network manager HUD, but we're going to leave them both in place and create the thing as we go. So the network manager, I'm going to go into the prefab view again, and I'm going to take this menu script and I'm going to drag it onto the prefab so that we have it just above this network manager HUD, and we're going to start writing a few things for that. So we're going to, now that we've got this script on, we'll just go back out of that prefab view, and we're still, as you can see, in the menu scene. So we're going to create just the first button that we want to be able to hook up to some code. So the main one that we normally click is this host, and we'll do client in a minute, but when we click LAN host, there's a few things that happen that we need to be able to do. So we'll create the menu nice and simply. So inside of game object UI, I'm going to create a button that it's going to be my host button. If we go into the 2D view now and double click canvas, you'll see that the button's in the bottom left hand side. I'm actually going to put it right in the middle of the screen, so I'm just using the normal transform here, and I should be able to select it and drag it into the middle of the screen. To change the text that's on it, I'm just going to just host will be fine for now. So we can change the font. I'm not going to worry about how pretty it looks. The important thing is that this canvas that we're going to have, this has to be on the network manager. We have to, this network manager is going to move from scene to scene, and we don't want to have to hook it up again in some fancy way. We can just drag it straight onto the network manager, and now that that's done, we need to make sure that the prefab itself that happens for both of them. So I'm just going to go over to network manager, and under overrides on the far right hand side, just click apply all. So now the network manager prefab contains the canvas button. I'm going to call this host button because that's kind of what we want to do. You can call it you can actually make the button say play or something like that if you prefer, or create game or something. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to call this just call this host text as well. We can fold this away. So we'll start with this and we'll build from it. So this host button has an event down the bottom that we need to be able to click to be able to do something. So that means we're going to use this menu script, and you remember the menu script is on the network manager. So if I open up this menu script, we should be able to get started on a few of the things that we're going to need. So as it's loading up, we're going to think about what we need to do. So this menu script probably needs a handle to the network manager. So let's just create that. So we'll make it public, so we can drag it on in the inspector, and it's should be network manager, and you notice it doesn't come up because we need to include using mirror, because mirror is where the network manager is. So let's try that again. So using network manager, and we'll call ours network manager with a small n. It gave me a suggestion there of network manager, which is quite like the way the Visual Studio does that. So we've got the network manager game object, and what we want to do is probably just write I'll go down the bottom here in case I need those. Actually no, I'll do it up here. So we'll just write a public function that we're going to hook up to the actual host button being clicked. So we're going to call it public with a void return type, and we'll just call it host. And all we really need to do is start the host. So if you get the network manager, we should be able to find a function called start host inside this, and you can find all this in the documentation for Mirror, and that's really all that's required in order to start that host. So let's hook the button up and just check that it works, and then you'll see the problem that we have or that we've built for ourselves that we need to fix. So that's now compiled. The network manager, we'll go down to this network manager, the menu script that we made, and we see the network manager HUD here. Now we could just drag network manager down onto this thing, and then we've created it. We could do it in the start menu with the get component as well if you really wanted to. Just make sure that that's done, and then this host button that you saw that we created earlier, here is the on-click event, and we need to create the event. The object we're looking for is the network manager, because that's where the menu script is. The function, this class we're looking for is the menu script, and the function we're looking for is host, because that's the one we just wrote. So in theory, here's another potential error. This event system here, this is required for all canvas elements to capture events from button clicks. So this event system also has to be put onto the network manager, so that this whole object here, including the event system, this whole thing is the thing that gets transferred from the menu scene onto the next scene. So we'll just make sure network manager prefab is applied so that they're all good and ready to go. And in theory now we should be able to click the play button. Instead of clicking this LAN host, we should be able to click this host, and it does exactly the same. And you'll notice what's happened here is that the host button stays there, which is expected, but we need to work out a way to fix that. So one way to fix that would be, on this canvas we can create basically empty game objects that we can switch on and off, so we display the correct canvas for the scene that we want. I think what we'll do first, however, is we'll create the client button as well. So that's probably the easiest step. If we want to just duplicate this button, so if we just click on, right click on it and say duplicate, this button is going to be the client button. So we'll call this the join button. This is going to be when, I'm going to change this text as well, this is going to be when we want to join a particular game. Join text. And we also, because when you notice when we play this, we also need an IP address. So because we're directly duplicating this menu here, when we click LAN client, this is the join button effectively, but we normally would type in the IP address of the other computer that's hosting the game. We can type that IP address in here, and there's things we can do to make that easier. We're going to ignore the server one only, but we need this box so we can put some stuff into that, so we can have the IP address to join. So I'm going to also, on the canvas, I should probably move this out of the way first, so just move it down below it, I think. And then I'm going to create on the canvas, from the UI element, I'm going to create an input field, just a standard input field, and we'll call this IP input field, so I know what it is. This IP input field, I'm going to move it to the right of, that one says the wrong thing. So I'm just moving it to the right of this button that should be the join button. So I'm going to change the text to join, so that it shows you it, and then this will be the address that we join. Now this is a little bit harder to hook up, but it's not impossible. So we'll just get straight into writing the code for that. So we have our join button, and we have this IP input field, and we're going to need a function that sets the IP address of where to join inside of our code. So you'll see if we look at this input field, we have an on value changed, and this is a dynamic event that can take a string. So we'll write that code, and I'll explain as we go. So if I look up the menu script that we've got up here, we're going to create a new public function with a void return type, and we'll call it set IP. This takes a string value that will be dynamically set when we hook this up. We'll call this just string value as IP, and all we're going to do is we're going to set the IP address for the network manager's network address. When you start the client, when the network manager starts a client or tries to connect, it will use the default internal value for network address. So it's as simple as getting the network manager and then setting network address, and you can find this all in the documentation. So all that will do is every time this thing changes, it'll set the Network Manager network address to the actual IP address. So I'm going to save this code and hook up the button, the input field. So this input field, they're really interesting. You can actually set inside of this main top level input field, you can set a default value. If I look here, oh, there it is. So text can be set to a default value. So I'm going to set that to localhost, and then go down to this on value changed and add the event. So again, the script is on the network manager. The script is called the menu script, and the set IP. Now don't click this one because we want to do the dynamic string one. This up here, set IP. If you do the other one, it's not going to actually pass the value to it, so you're going to end up crashing and it won't work. So this dynamic string set IP is the one that you want, and then hopefully when we click this button, this has been set correctly and it should try to join. So we'll write the script for the join button now as well. So we'll just go to our menu script again, and we'll create a new function. We'll call it public void, and we'll just call it join. It doesn't take any values. So all we need to do, again, it's really easy, just do network manager, and this time it's start client. So this will just start the client and use all of the default values. If you notice it here, it uses the network address and network port properties of the network manager in order to do the joining, so that's why we set it here. So we'll just have to build this and test it, and I'm going to pause and do that, and you should do the same and just make sure that it works. But before we do, we really should make sure they're hooked up correctly. So I think we duplicated this button, so we need to make sure that it's hooked up to the correct thing. So this join button needs to be hooked up not to the host function, but the menu script and the join function. So yeah, so make sure that that's done. So the host button runs the method host on our menu script class, and the join button runs the method join in the menu script function class, and both of those do different things. So the join starts the client, but the host starts the host. So I am now going to build this and test it and make sure that it works. So as you can see, built it. I'm just going to run a few instances of this so that you can see that it does actually work. So just this top left one here, I'm just going to click on host, and I'm just going to alt tab so I can get my mouse back. If you type in 127.0.0.1, you'll get, this is the equivalent IP of localhost, and if you click join, you should be able to join, and you should be able to see the guys moving around. And alt tab again, where's my mouse gone? Oh, there it is, down here. So localhost is equivalent of 127.0.0.1, and we click join again, and we should be able to run around in the middle between these guys. So you see that it is working correctly, but you can see that this isn't getting disabled, so it does make it look really weird. So we're just going to fix that in the next little chunk. So I think the easiest way to do this is to create a couple of panels that we can enable and disable based on which game mode we're in, effectively, whether we're in the menu or whether we're in the game. So what we're going to do is just open up this canvas. I'm going to create a panel. So if you go to UI and then choose panel, and we'll call this panel menu panel. And what we'll do is put the host, join and input fields on the menu panel. Oh, it's not letting us do this, so go back here. I'm gonna just gonna unpack this prefab so that I can do this, and then we can just rebuild it and put it back into the prefab thing. So once again, so I've right click to unpack that prefab so I can do it. So I'm going to take those 3 elements that are part of the menu and put those on the menu panel, and then under the canvas again I'm going to create a new panel that's going to be where is panel, and we're going to call this game panel, and I'm going to put eventually we'll put the stop button on the game panel as well. We could actually, we'll just do it now since we've got the game panel open. So we want the stop button to be on this, so we'll do the code for it later, but we'll just put the button in right now. So UI button, I'm going to take this button, I'm going to move it to the top right corner, and I'm going to set the anchor to the top right corner as well. So that allows us to scale when we scale the screen size. So this button is on the game panel. We're going to call this stop button, and we obviously don't want this to appear while we're not connected, so we'll change this text here to stop or exit or whatever it is you want, and change this to stop button text. Alright, so we have the stop button and that's in place. So the Network Manager, we're going to get a handle to both of these so we can switch them on and switch them off where we need them. So if I open up the menu script right now, so we're just going to make these public, and we need them to be game objects. So we're just going to say public game object, and we're going to call this lowercase menu panel, and we're going to make another one which is a public game object, and we're going to call this game panel, and then we'll be able to switch these on and off as we require. Game panel. So I'm glad I kept the start function, because what we probably want to do at the start function is set the when the thing first loads, we want the menu up. So we'll do the menu panel set active true, and that will make sure that that's visible, and we want the game panel to be inactive, so we don't want that stop button to be appearing. False. And then basically when we connect, when we join or host a game, we should swap this around. So I'm just going to copy paste this because it's easier. Control C to copy, Control V, and so this is us hosting, so we want to then effectively switch the menu panel off and put the game panel on. So we're setting them menu panel to false and the game panel to true, and because we want to do exactly the same thing, it's not great code but it'll do for now until we refactor it and make it nicer, is do exactly the same thing under join. So disable the menu panel and enable the game panel. So in theory we should give this a go and see if it works. So if I let's let this build, make sure everything is saved, hit the play button. What we should, I haven't hooked them up yet, so Network Manager, there's my panels, so I can take the menu panel and put it into menu panel, game panel into game panel, oops, menu panel into menu panel, game panel into game panel, get those the right way around, and hit play. And then in theory I can hit the host and the panel disappears, and I now have the other panel up in place, so the stop button is up here. It's not hooked up yet, but it does work. So that's a good start, and what we're going to do next is just get that stop button set up so it's working. So it's pretty much like we did the last time. We'll jump to our code again, and we're going to create a new function, public function with a void return type, and we're just going to call this stop. The way this works is we've got the network manager, and we've got some functions where we can stop stuff, where we can stop client or stop host, but the issue is we need to work out whether we're actually a client or a host, and one of the easiest ways is just to look at the network manager mode, and you can see information from that. So I'm just going to do an if statement. So if the network manager mode, so network manager dot mode is equal to network manager mode dot host, then that means we are the host. So we click the host button, and in that occasion we need to basically stop the host. So we'll just say stop host. It doesn't require anything else. So it's another if, just move that up a bit. So another if, this time if we are client, so if network manager dot mode is equal to network manager mode dot client, so if we clicked on the join button, then we should be able to use the stop client. So we'll say network manager dot stop client. So it seemed a little bit long-winded way of doing things, but we needed to be sure that we were either a host. If we were a host, we could stop host. If we were a client, we had to stop client, because it wouldn't work the other way. We're going to just quickly show that that does actually work, and then I'll show you the other problem that we had and how I'd like to solve it. So after we've also made sure we set this up, so we have the stop button right here, and we have to set this on click event up. So we'll click on, as we did before, network manager, the menu script is what we're looking for, and this time it's the stop button. So in theory that should run the function. So we're just going to give this a little go, make sure that this works. So we can host the game, everything works fine, and we click on stop, and the cursor is really frustrating because I can't click on it. So I did see this problem before, and I just want to quickly show you how to make sure that this does actually work. So I'm going to show you the code that I did to give it a pause button, so this enables the cursor again and shows this menu. So what we're going to do is, if we go back to our code again, back to this menu script, what we're going to do is we're going to create a boolean. So we're going to type in bool and paused, and we're going to create a paused state, which we'll be able to change based on key press. So right now we want to be absolutely sure that when we start the game, when the game actually starts, that we're actually in not in paused mode, because that will be when the menu comes up. So I'm just gonna, this should happen, but we might jump back to this when we do it. So inside of where's my start function? There it is. Inside of start, we want to be sure that paused is equal to false. I keep spelling false wrong today. So paused is equal to false. When we also when we connect, we want to set that to false as well. So Control C to copy that. So when we join a game, we want to make sure we're not paused, and when we host a game, we want to make sure we're not paused. So that's all saved. When we're stop the game, we probably want to set the paused state as well back to unpaused. So paste that in as well. So we don't want to be paused when we're not actually inside of the game, which is why it gets quite confusing when we get to the start here. So we'll just do the little toggle that we're going to do. So we're just going to check for the key press. So if input dot get key down, and we're going to choose the escape key because that's what people expect. So if we press the escape key, we want to make paused equal to not paused. So that will toggle it between on and off, between true and false. The next step is kind of confusing. It took me a little bit to work this out. We basically want to say, are we in the game? So the way we can do this is we can just look at this, the network server or the network client. So you're just going to have to trust me on this one. So network server, and if we're active, so if the network server is active, or, so that's the two straight up and down lines, then network, if the network client as well, so network client. So if we've connected as a host or we've connected as a client, then we want to set the cursor correctly based on that. And I'm going to use the method I showed you a couple of videos back. So we're just going to set the cursor.lock mode or lock state. We'll pass in this paused statement, and then if paused is true, we're going to say that we want the cursor lock mode to be none. So if we're actually in pause, we want it to not be locked. If we're not in pause, we want it to be locked again. So we'll say cursor lock mode dot locked for the negative for this one. So we've set the cursor lock state. What we can do also in this occasion is we can enable and disable the correct panel. So I'll just do this the long way round. I'm going to say so if we're actually paused, what we want to be able to do is set the game panel to be active. So game panel dot set active, we want that to be true. So if we're paused, we want to be able to play that, show that stop button. If we're not paused while we're in the game, then we want to set the game panel to be inactive. So we want to set active to be false. I'll try and spell it correctly this time. So the this part of the code here just checks, are we connected? And if we are connected, then we can deal with the cursor lock mode. So this won't happen. We won't be able to do this while we're inside the normal menu, because they're not connected until you've clicked the host or client connect. Then we'll set this cursor based on whether we're actually paused or not. We can also set the game panel active or inactive if we are not connected. If we're connected and we're paused, or connected and not paused. The other thing that it allows us to do is we can also do an else statement for this. So if we are not connected, so that means we're in the menu, then we can make sure that the correct panels are active. So we can set active the menu panel, set active. We want this menu panel to be active, and if the game panel while we're in this not connected, so we want to make sure that the game panel is inactive. So that's false, if I can spell false. The last thing is just to make sure that there's nothing interfering with this. So the first person controller had a part of code where we tried to set the lock state and tried to lock the cursor. So we can just comment that out with the 2 forward slashes, because we don't actually need it in here. It probably didn't make a lot of sense that it was connected to a single player, because there was going to be lots of players connected to this instance. There's only one network manager and it has one menu script on it, so it makes sense that we're doing it here, because the menu is in charge of the buttons. So it kind of makes sense that this works. So I'm just going to quickly build this and test it, and just to make sure that it works. So as you can see, the game's been built now. So we actually can get rid of completely the default menu HUD, because we have all the functionality. So we can host a game. When we press escape, we can stop that, and then the cursor is back again. We can hit host again, and the only minor thing is you want to probably hide the pointer as well, which you can do. When we join as well with the client, you see it's still connected. We can still escape out, and leave it or rejoin, and we can get our cursor back. So we just need to click on it again and it will sort of lock it back to this instance of the game. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to probably do a different series or use a different methodology, but if you've enjoyed the series, it's a bit of a long one getting the custom menu, and obviously the menu looks rubbish, but I've taught you some of the concepts of what to do with create menus and how to organize them. The application documentation is the place to look for Mirror if you want to find out more, and also just the Unity documentation as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed this series, and hopefully you can make the menus look an awful lot nicer than I've made mine, and I'll see you with my next series. Please feel free to subscribe and make some comments about what it is you'd like to see next. But thank you, I've enjoyed doing this one, and good luck with your coding.